My brother walked into the quarterly board meeting, smirked at the investors, seated around the mahogany table, and announced I was fired. Effective immediately. No warning. No severance discussion. Just 8 stunned board members watching as he delivered the line that would destroy him. "You're just a secretary," he said, voice dripping with contempt. "We don't need you anymore." I'm Sarah Mitchell, 32, operations director, making $145,000 a year in Charlotte, North Carolina. I spent a decade building this company from a 3-person startup in my father's garage to a $12 million manufacturing operation with clients across the Southeast. If you've ever poured your life into something only to watch someone try to steal it right in front of you, smash that subscribe button right now, because this story ends with perfect justice. Let me take you back to how this all started. 10 years ago, my father, Richard Mitchell, started Mitchell Manufacturing in a 1,200 square foot industrial space off Independence Boulevard. He had the vision, the engineering background from his years at Boeing, and exactly $50,000 in startup capital scraped together from his retirement account. I was 22, fresh out of UNC Charlotte with a business degree, and I became employee number 2. We worked 16-hour days designing precision components for medical devices, me handling operations while Dad focused on product development. My younger brother Evan was 19 then, finishing his sophomore year at NC State, partying through a communications major he'd eventually abandon. Dad always said Evan needed more help, that I was the strong one who could handle things on my own. That became the family mantra, repeated so often it felt like scripture. Mom Linda echoed it constantly during Sunday dinners at their South Charlotte home, reminding me that success meant I didn't need the same support Evan did. By year 3, we'd landed our first major contract with a regional hospital network. The purchase order was for $280,000, and I negotiated every term, coordinated production schedules, and managed quality control inspections. Dad handled some engineering refinements, but I ran the actual business. We moved into a 12,000 square foot facility in University area, hired 8 employees, and I structured the operations manual that became our foundation. Revenue hit $1.2 million that year. Evan was still in college, now attempting a business degree after switching majors twice. When he failed 2 finance courses junior year, Dad asked me to loan him money for summer classes. I wired $12,000 to cover tuition and expenses, no paperwork, just a family favor. Evan never mentioned paying it back, and I never asked. That pattern would repeat itself for years. Evan graduated eventually, 5 years for a 4-year degree, and immediately applied to MBA programs. He got rejected from UNC Kenan-Flagler, Wake Forest, and Duke. The following year, he tried again with the same results. Dad suggested I help fund a private consulting course in Atlanta that promised business school preparation. The program cost $28,000, and Evan swore it would be his pathway to Wharton or Northwestern. I transferred the money in 2 installments, watching my savings account drop below the comfort zone I'd carefully maintained. Evan completed 4 months of the 12-month program before deciding it wasn't the right fit. The $28,000 was gone, and he moved back to Charlotte to figure out his next step. Mom called it a learning experience and reminded me that I'd always been better with money management anyway. When Evan turned 26, Dad brought him into Mitchell Manufacturing. I'd been running operations for 7 years by then, overseeing 23 employees, and managing contracts worth $4.8 million annually. Evan started as a business development associate at $95,000 a year, a salary Dad insisted was necessary to attract top talent, even though Evan had zero industry experience and no proven sales record. His first major project was securing a contract with a Kentucky medical supply distributor. He quoted pricing wrong, promising delivery timelines we couldn't meet, and committed us to specifications our equipment couldn't handle. The contract was worth $175,000 on paper, but fixing his mistakes cost us $30,000 in rush manufacturing, penalty fees, and expedited shipping. I restructured the entire production schedule over a 3-week period, working until 2 a.m. most nights to prevent us from losing the client completely. Evan apologized to Dad in private, promised to be more careful, and faced zero consequences. His salary never changed. His title remained. And Dad told me privately that everyone makes mistakes when they're learning. 6 months later, Evan convinced Dad to let him handle inventory ordering for our spring production cycle. He overordered components based on a forecast he'd created without consulting our actual client commitments. We ended up with $63,000 in excess materials that didn't match any active contracts, tying up cash flow we needed for payroll and facility expansion. I spent 2 months finding buyers for the surplus, eventually recouping $48,000 through secondary markets and smaller regional distributors. The $15,000 loss hit our quarterly earnings, but Dad waved it off as a learning curve expense. Evan got a company car that same quarter, a leased BMW 3 Series that cost $850 monthly. Dad said it was important for client meetings, that professional appearance mattered in business development. I drove a 5-year-old Honda Accord. I'd bought used. The real breaking point in my financial relationship with Evan came when he decided to pursue his MBA again. He'd been at the company for 18 months, long enough to realize he didn't enjoy the day-to-day work, but still convinced he needed the credential. This time, he got accepted to a mid-tier program in Tennessee, a 2-year commitment that would cost $73,000 total for tuition, fees, and living expenses since he'd be relocating. Dad encouraged him to go, saying it would prepare him for senior leadership eventually. The company couldn't afford to pay for it, not with the expansion plans we had in progress. But Dad looked at me across his office desk and asked if I could help. He framed it as an investment in the family business, in Evan's future contribution to Mitchell Manufacturing. I had $92,000 in my savings account at that point, money I'd been setting aside to eventually buy a house in one of the newer developments near Ballantyne. I transferred $73,000 in 3 payments over the first year of Evan's program, watching my down payment fund evaporate. Evan sent a thank you text after the first payment, nothing after the others. He lasted 11 months in the MBA program before dropping out. He called it a mismatch with his learning style, said the curriculum was too theoretical and not practical enough for real business application. The $73,000 was gone. He had no degree to show for it, and he moved back to Charlotte expecting to return to Mitchell Manufacturing. Dad welcomed him back at the same salary, now $98,000, after a cost of living adjustment I'd implemented company-wide. I never asked about the MBA money. Neither did Dad. Mom's only comment was that at least Evan had tried, and that experience was valuable, even without the credential. When Evan's BMW lease came up for renewal 6 months later, he couldn't afford the payment on his own. Dad asked if I could cover it temporarily until Evan got his finances sorted out. I paid $850 every month for the next 2 years, a total of $20,400 that Evan never reimbursed. He drove that car to client meetings twice, maybe 3 times. Mostly he used it for weekend trips to Asheville and brunches in South End. By the time I turned 31, I'd given Evan $138,400 in direct financial support over 8 years. He'd contributed minimal value to the company, botched multiple projects that cost us real money, and showed no interest in actually learning the business I'd built from the ground up. Mitchell Manufacturing was generating $9.7 million in annual revenue, employing 41 people and operating out of a 28,000 square foot facility we'd purchased outright. I held the title of operations director, managed every major client relationship, and oversaw all production, quality control, and logistics operations. Evan held the title of business development manager, attended occasional trade shows, and spent most days in his office watching YouTube videos about entrepreneurship. Dad's health started declining that year. Heart issues that he'd been ignoring finally catching up to him. He had surgery in March, recovered slowly, and started talking more seriously about succession planning. The conversation happened in his office on a Thursday afternoon in October. Dad called Evan and me in together, closed the door, and explained that he'd updated his will. The company shares would split 60% to Evan, 40% to me. He explained it calmly, almost apologetically, saying that Evan needed the controlling stake because he'd struggled more in life and required the security. I'd always been capable, always figured things out, so I didn't need the same level of protection. The business would stay in the family, we'd run it together, and everyone would benefit from the growth we'd built. I sat there, absorbing the numbers, doing the math in my head. 60% control meant Evan could outvote me on any major decision, despite having contributed almost nothing to the company's actual success. It meant that everything I'd built, every system I'd implemented, every client I'd secured, would ultimately answer to someone who couldn't manage a simple inventory order without losing $15,000. Dad died 4 months later, sudden cardiac arrest on a Sunday morning in February. The funeral was massive, clients and employees and industry contacts filling the chapel at St. Matthew Catholic Church. The will reading happened the following week at the attorney's office on East Boulevard, and the share distribution was exactly what Dad had outlined. 60% to Evan, 40% to me, and a letter Dad had written encouraging us to work together and honor the legacy he had started. Evan cried during the reading, talked about making Dad proud, promised to lead the company with integrity and vision. I signed the documents, shook the attorney's hand, and drove back to the office to handle the 3 client emergencies that had emerged while we were grieving. For the first 2 months after Dad died, operations continued normally. I ran the day-to-day. Evan attended board meetings and contributed occasional ideas that I'd politely redirect into workable strategies, and the company maintained its growth trajectory. Then Evan hired Colin Harper. Colin was Evan's roommate from his brief time in the MBA program, a guy who'd actually finished his degree and spent 2 years working in corporate finance at a bank in Nashville before getting laid off in a restructuring. Evan brought him in as CFO without consulting me, announcing it at a Monday morning leadership meeting like it was already decided. Colin's salary was $118,000, higher than mine, despite having 0 manufacturing experience and no knowledge of our industry. His first week, he started questioning my operational decisions, asking why we used certain suppliers, why our production schedules ran the way they did, whether we really needed as many quality control checkpoints. I answered each question professionally, backed up with data and client requirements, but I could see where this was heading. Evan had found his ally, someone who spoke his language and validated his belief that the company needed fresh thinking. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday. In early May, 8 weeks after Colin joined, we had 8 board members at that point, a mix of early investors, industry advisors, and 2 independent directors Dad had brought on during our Series A funding round. The meeting started normally: financial review, client update, facility expansion discussion. Then Evan stood up, cleared his throat, and looked directly at me. "Before we move to new business, I need to address a personnel matter," he said, voice steady and rehearsed. The room went quiet, board members glancing at each other. I set down my pen, already knowing something was wrong. Effective immediately, Sarah Mitchell is terminated from her position as operations director. The words hung in the air like a chemical spill, toxic and spreading fast. One board member actually gasped, a short intake of breath that broke the silence. I stared at Evan, waiting for the punchline, the explanation that would make this make sense. He smiled, not warmly, not apologetically, just a cold, satisfied curve of his mouth. "You're just the secretary," he continued, voice louder now, playing to the room. "We don't need you anymore. Colin and I are restructuring operations with actual business expertise, not someone who's been coasting on Dad's goodwill for a decade." I felt the blood drain from my face, but I didn't move. 8 board members sat frozen, eyes darting between Evan and me, no one speaking. Colin sat beside Evan, nodding slightly, arms crossed, like this had been planned. I stood slowly, chair scraping against the floor, the sound abnormally loud in the silent room. "You're firing me," I said, voice flat. Not a question, just confirming the reality. Evan nodded. "The company is moving in a new direction. We'll handle your final paycheck and exit paperwork by end of week. You can clean out your office today." I looked at the board members, these people who'd watched me build this company from 3 employees to 41, who'd approved budgets I'd created, who'd celebrated milestones I'd achieved. Not one of them said a word. The chairman, a venture capitalist named Robert Chen, shifted uncomfortably in his seat but stayed silent. I picked up my portfolio, tucked my laptop under my arm, and walked toward the door. "Sarah," Evan called after me, voice almost cheerful, "leave your access badge on the table." I stopped, turned back, and placed the badge on the conference table. Then I walked out of the boardroom, down the hallway, past the production floor where my team was working, and into my office. I closed the door, sat down at my desk, and stared at the wall for exactly 90 seconds. Then I opened my laptop and got to work. I pulled up my encrypted cloud storage and started downloading files. Every patent application, every development notebook, every email chain documenting product creation. My fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision, no hesitation, no second guessing. The first file finished downloading at 2:47 p.m., a PDF of patent US 102304B2, filed 6 years ago, covering our core manufacturing process for precision medical components. My name listed as sole inventor. I moved to the next file, then the next, building a digital arsenal, while Evan celebrated downstairs. My phone buzzed 3 times in 10 minutes. Mom calling. I declined each one. A text appeared. Evan says you're making a scene. Please don't embarrass the family. I silenced notifications and kept working. By 4:15 p.m., I had everything I needed, backed up to 3 separate locations: cloud storage, external drive, and a secure server Marcus Chen had set up for me years ago when we first started filing patents. Marcus was my friend from law school, days at UNC, the one who'd gone into intellectual property law, while I'd chosen the business route. We'd stayed close, meeting monthly for coffee, and he'd been handling Mitchell Manufacturing's patent portfolio since the beginning. He knew every detail of what I'd created, every innovation I'd developed, every piece of technology that made this company valuable. I packed one cardboard box with personal items: a photo of Dad and me at the facility grand opening, my UNC diploma, the Crystal Award from our largest client, thanking me personally for 5 years of exceptional service. Everything else in the office belonged to the company, except the ideas in my head and the patents in my name. I walked out at 4:53 p.m., nodded to the security guard, who looked confused about why I was leaving, with a box, and loaded everything into my Honda. The spring air felt cool against my face. Magnolia trees blooming pink along the parking lot, completely indifferent to the fact that my world had just shifted on its axis. I sat in my car for 2 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the building I'd given a decade to. Then I drove to Marshall Park, found an empty picnic table overlooking the lake, and made 3 phone calls. First call went to Marcus Chen at 5:18 p.m. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. "Sarah, what's happening?" I explained the board meeting, Evan's announcement, the firing in front of 8 witnesses. Marcus went quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "I've been waiting for you to use this," he said finally, and I could hear the satisfaction in his tone. We'd had this conversation, hypothetically over the years, always in the abstract, always prefaced with "if things ever went sideways." Now things had gone vertical off a cliff, and Marcus was ready. "Come to my office tomorrow morning at 8. Bring everything you downloaded. We're going to remind your brother, who actually built that company." Second call went to Patricia Williams, the accountant who'd managed my personal finances since I started at Mitchell Manufacturing. I needed her to pull every bank record showing money I had transferred to Evan over the years, every loan payment I'd made on his behalf, every expense I'd covered. Patricia promised to have a complete report by morning, her voice tight with controlled anger when I explained why I needed it. "That boy never deserved you," she said before hanging up. The truth of that statement settled in my chest like a stone. Third call went to my apartment, just to hear my own voicemail greeting, and confirm that reality still existed outside this nightmare. I didn't leave a message for myself. That would have been insane. Instead, I drove to Harris Teeter, bought a rotisserie chicken and a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc, and ate dinner alone in my living room while researching employment, lawyers, and drafting a timeline of every significant contribution I'd made to Mitchell Manufacturing. The list filled 4 single-space pages by the time I finished at midnight. I fell asleep on the couch fully clothed, laptop still open, and woke up at 5:30 a.m. with the sun streaming through my blinds and my phone showing 14 missed calls, 6 from Mom, 5 from Evan, 3 from Colin. I deleted the voicemails without listening and headed to Marcus's office. Marcus Chen operated out of a restored warehouse, building in Noda, exposed brick walls, and polished concrete floors that screamed creative professional. His firm specialized in intellectual property litigation, and his client list included half the tech startups in the Research Triangle. I arrived at 7:52 a.m., carrying my laptop and the external drive, and found Marcus already in his conference room with coffee brewing and a legal pad covered in notes. "Let's see what we're working with," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I opened my laptop and pulled up the patent portfolio. 3 core patents, all filed between 6 and 8 years ago, all listing me as the sole inventor. Patent 1 covered the manufacturing process for our precision components, the specific methodology for achieving tolerances within 0.001 millimeters that made our products superior to competitors. Patent 2 protected the software system I developed for quality control automation, the program that reduced defect rates by 87% and became our major selling point to medical device manufacturers. Patent 3 covered the product design itself, the geometric specifications, and material compositions that allowed our components to perform under extreme conditions. Marcus read through each patent certificate slowly, cross-referencing against the development notebooks I'd kept during the creation process. Every page documented with dates, technical drawings, problem-solving notes, all in my handwriting. "Your father knew about these," Marcus said. "Not quite." A question. I nodded. He approved every filing, said it was smart to protect what I'd built, and that intellectual property was the company's most valuable asset. Marcus smiled, the expression sharp and calculating. Did Evan ever ask about the patents? I thought back through 10 years of casual conversations, board meetings, strategic planning sessions. Never once. He assumed they were company property, that Mitchell Manufacturing owned everything automatically. Marcus tapped his pen against the legal pad. Common misconception. Inventors own their patents unless they've explicitly assigned rights to an employer. Did you sign any assignment agreements? I shook my head. Dad and I discussed it once. He said family didn't need that kind of paperwork between them, that trust was more important than contracts. The irony of that statement crashed over me like a wave. Trust. The thing Evan had just obliterated in front of 8 board members and 2 senior employees. Marcus opened his laptop and started drafting. "We're filing cease and desist letters today. 1 to Mitchell Manufacturing, 1 to every major client currently using products based on your patents. Without a valid licensing agreement from you, they're all infringing." My stomach tightened. "That'll shut down production completely." Marcus looked up, his expression serious but not unkind. "Sarah, they fired you yesterday. They're not your problem anymore. Your brother chose to play hardball without knowing what game he was actually in. Now he learns." By noon, Marcus had drafted and filed 5 cease and desist letters. Mitchell Manufacturing received theirs via email and certified mail, the legal language precise and unambiguous. "You are hereby notified that your manufacturing operations utilize patented processes and designs owned exclusively by Sarah Mitchell. All production activities must cease immediately pending negotiation of a licensing agreement. Continued operations without proper authorization constitute willful patent infringement, subject to statutory damages of up to $150,000 per violation." The 3 largest clients, companies representing 71% of Mitchell Manufacturing's annual revenue, received identical letters explaining that the products they were purchasing were manufactured using unlicensed, patented technology. Each letter included copies of the patent certificates and offered them a simple choice: stop buying from Mitchell Manufacturing or become co-defendants in the infringement lawsuit Marcus was prepared to file. I spent the afternoon gathering additional evidence, client contracts from the past 5 years, every one of them signed by me, negotiated by me, fulfilled through systems I'd implemented, bank records from Patricia showing the $138,400 in transfers to Evan, each one documented with dates and amounts, security footage from the board meeting, which I'd requested from our IT manager via text message before he'd realized I was no longer authorized to make such requests. He sent the file anyway, loyalty outlasting my official employment by exactly 16 hours. The footage showed everything: Evan's smirk, Colin's nod of approval, the board members' uncomfortable silence my controlled exit. I saved it to the encrypted drive and sent a copy to Marcus. Employee testimonials started arriving unbidden. My former production manager sent an email at 3:47 p.m. with the subject line, "For the record." The body contained a detailed account of every project I'd led, every crisis I had solved, every instance where my decisions had saved the company from Evan's mistakes. Our quality control supervisor sent something similar an hour later. Then the logistics coordinator, the senior machinist, and 2 of the sales representatives I'd trained personally. They weren't organizing this collectively, weren't coordinating their statements. They were just individually furious that I'd been fired and wanted someone to know the truth. I forwarded everything to Marcus, the documentation building into an irrefutable narrative of who had actually built Mitchell Manufacturing's success. Wednesday morning, at 9:23 a.m., Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed Robert Chen, the board chairman. Marcus put it on speaker. "Mr. Chen, what can I do for you?" Robert's voice came through, tight and stressed. "We need to talk about these cease-and-desist letters." The board was not informed that Sarah Mitchell held personal ownership of the company's core patents. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "That's unfortunate. Perhaps you should have asked more questions before voting to terminate the person who created all your valuable intellectual property." Robert cleared his throat. "We didn't vote. Evan presented it as an executive decision, said he had majority control, and was exercising his authority as primary shareholder." I felt a flash of vindication. The board hadn't been complicit, just blindsided. "The company needs those patents to operate," Robert continued. "We're willing to negotiate a licensing agreement. Reasonable terms, fair market rates." Marcus glanced at me. I shook my head once, a small, definitive movement. "Ms. Mitchell declines," Marcus said smoothly. "She's exploring other opportunities for her intellectual property. Mitchell Manufacturing had his chance to value her contributions appropriately. That window has closed." Robert's voice rose slightly. "You're going to destroy the company. 41 people will lose their jobs. Clients will lose their supplier. Years of work will evaporate." Marcus's expression didn't change. Then perhaps the majority shareholder should have considered those consequences before firing the person who held the keys to the entire operation. "We'll be in touch if Miss Mitchell's position changes." He ended the call. My phone buzzed 30 seconds later with a text from Evan. "We need to talk. This is insane." I blocked his number and poured another cup of coffee. The emergency board meeting happened Friday afternoon. Marcus and I weren't invited. but we heard about it within an hour through Robert Chen, who called Marcus's office at 4:15 p.m. sounding like a man who'd aged 10 years in 3 days. The meeting had been brutal. Investors demanding answers. The bank threatening to call their credit line due to business interruption. Clients sending termination notices for existing contracts. Evan had tried to explain that this was a temporary setback, that Sarah was being unreasonable, that they'd resolve it through negotiation or legal action if necessary. Colin had backed him up, suggesting they could engineer around the patents or find alternative suppliers for components while they developed new processes. Then one of the independent directors, a woman named Jessica Torres, who'd spent 20 years in medical device manufacturing, had asked the question that broke everything open. Who actually designed these products? Who developed the processes? Who wrote the quality control software? The room had gone silent because everyone except Evan and Colin knew the answer. Every board member had sat through presentations where I'd explained technical specifications, walked through process improvements, demonstrated the software's capabilities. They'd watched me build this company's operational excellence piece by piece, while Evan attended trade shows and Colin reviewed spreadsheets. Jessica had continued, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. We fired the person who owns our products, and now we're surprised she won't let us use them. What exactly did we think was going to happen? Robert told Marcus that Evan's face had gone white, that Colin had tried to pivot to discussion of legal remedies, and that 3 board members had walked out before the meeting officially adjourned. The company's valuation had been $12 million on Monday morning. By Friday afternoon, with production halted and clients fleeing, estimates put it under $2 million. Saturday brought the media. The Charlotte Business Journal ran a story with the headline, "Mitchell Manufacturing CEO Fires Sister, Loses Company IP." The article detailed the board meeting firing, the patent ownership revelation, and the resulting operational shutdown. They'd interviewed 2 former clients who confirmed receiving cease and desist letters and terminating their contracts as a result. The reporter had reached out to me for comment, but I declined through Marcus. Evan had apparently given a statement claiming this was a family dispute being blown out of proportion, that his sister was acting emotionally rather than rationally. The quote made me laugh out loud, a short, bitter sound in my empty apartment. Emotional. I'd spent 3 days methodically dismantling his company using legal documents and intellectual property law. There was nothing emotional about it. Sunday evening, Mom called from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Sarah, please," she said, voice trembling. "You're destroying everything your father built. The company is going under. Evan is falling apart. This has to stop." I let her finish, then spoke calmly. "Dad built a garage startup. I built a $12 million company. Evan fired me for being a secretary. These are consequences, not punishments." Mom's voice hardened. "He made a mistake. Family forgives mistakes." I thought about the $138,400 in loans never repaid, the decade of covering Evan's failures, the 60% controlling share Dad gave him because I was too capable to need protection. There is no family business anymore, Mom. Evan made sure of that when he fired me in front of the board. She started crying, asking me to reconsider, to think about the employees and the legacy and everything we'd worked for. I ended the call mid-sentence and blocked that number too, The bankruptcy auction happened 8 weeks later. Mitchell Manufacturing's remaining assets sold to a competitor based in Greensboro, office equipment and machinery going for $1.7 million total. Evan's 60% stake in a company now worth essentially nothing translated to exactly $0 in his pocket after creditors took their share. The facility lease got absorbed by the buyer, the employees either laid off or offered positions in Greensboro at reduced salaries, and the Mitchell Manufacturing name disappeared from business registries in North Carolina. I heard through Marcus that Evan had moved back in with Mom, that he lost the BMW when he couldn't make lease payments, that Colin had taken a job in Atlanta and left town without looking back. Mom sent one email in September. The subject line just, "Please." The body said, "Please forgive him." I deleted it without reading past the first line and set up a filter to automatically archive anything from her address. 6 months after the board meeting, I stood in a different office, in a different building, this one in the South End neighborhood where new construction met old warehouses and coffee shops stayed open until midnight. The sign outside read, "Mitchell Precision Technologies, LLC." My company, built from the patents I owned, staffed by 4 former Mitchell Manufacturing employees who'd reached out asking if I was starting something new. We'd just closed our first major contract, a medical device manufacturer in Virginia, needing exactly the kind of precision components I'd spent 10 years perfecting. The contract was worth $890,000 annually, more than enough to fund our first year of operations and position us for growth. Our valuation, after 6 months of operation, hit $8.2 million based on projected revenue and the strength of our intellectual property portfolio. I'd licensed my patents to myself, hired the best people from my old team, and rebuilt what Evan had tried to take. Evan was working retail now, according to the mutual acquaintance who couldn't resist updating me despite my lack of interest. Some electronics store in North Lake Mall, making around $32,000 a year, living in Mom's basement at age 33. His LinkedIn profile still listed him as former CEO, Mitchell Manufacturing, the title a monument to his brief moment of power before reality reasserted itself. I never looked him up, never drove past Mom's house to see his car in the driveway, never spent a single moment wondering if he'd learned anything from the experience. He wasn't my problem anymore, wasn't my responsibility, wasn't my family in any meaningful sense of the word. I built it once in a garage with my father, working 16-hour days to prove a concept could become a company. I built it better the second time, with the wisdom of knowing exactly what I was worth and the legal framework to protect it. And Evan will never touch it again. The patents stay in my name. The company stays under my control. And the only family I answer to now is the team I chose to build this with. That's the lesson I learned. Competence doesn't need forgiveness, and justice doesn't require reconciliation. Some bridges burn clean, and you build something stronger from the ashes.